Tyler. I was led into a room like a cellar. It was dark and cold, with only one light hanging low from the ceiling. It was swinging from side to side, and a single chair sat underneath it with chains around the legs. I was shoved down into the chair and chained up, huge padlocks hanging from the chains pulled at my limbs in their sockets. 3 Martians came in after me and the other one. They all seemed to be enjoying what was going on. I still had no clue, though I could guess. Each alien was carrying something different, some kind of weapons I didn't recognize. They were, so to speak, out of this world. One of them pulled out some sort of object with a lens on it. He pressed something and it lit up, then he pointed it in my direction.
Say hi,
The alien ordered. I kept my lips pressed tightly shut. If they were going to kill me either way, I was going to hold out until the very end.
say hello.
The one who led me in here barked, whacking me over the back of the head. My head lolled forward so I was looking at my legs, but still I gritted my teeth tightly shut.
You're not going to say hi to your Maxie?
One of them cackled, putting on a baby voice, though with their rough voices and poor accents, it wasn't cute at all. My eyes lifted to the lens, and I glared at them. Don't you dare hurt him, I warned, venom in my voice. They all laughed.
It's not him you have to worry about,
The other one on the right said, then walked into the line of the camera and held up his weapon. The alien grumbled something in their native tongue before laughing and turning to me. It propped its weapon's smaller end under my chin, forcing my head up to look at him.
Look at the camera so Kyasora can see the fear in your eyes,
The alien breathed, smirking. I didn't. Instead, I just stared into his eyes with hatred. I wasn't afraid to die. My only regret was not getting to tell Max that I remembered everything. A light bulb went off in my mind as an idea hit me. I remember, I said loud enough for the camera to pick it up. The aliens all shared looks.
What?
One of them asked. I remember everything. I remember you, I said, this time with my eyes landing on the lens. The Martians caught on, and the one with the weapon under my chin lashed out, swiping me across the face. My head was thrown to the side, and a burning, stinging feeling spread across the side of my face as my head was thrown to the side. The aliens cheered something, then I was stabbed in the stomach with the blunt end. My eyes saw white as the pain seared through me. I coughed once, then choked the rest down. Damn it, these Martians sure were strong. I'm pretty sure that blow just ruptured a kidney. They didn't hold back. Another alien walked forward, and together with the one from before, they began to beat me with their weapons. Another smack in the face slit my lip, and I tasted blood as it swelled. One of them kicked me in the chest so hard the chair ripped from where it had been nailed into the ground, and I was thrown backwards, my head smacking against the concrete floor. I felt something crack, and then felt the warm blood pooling under where my skull rested on the ground. My head was killing me, and I wasn't sure how much pain I could endure before I passed out. After that, I'd slip away slowly, never seeing Max again, never telling him that I loved him. I never once said the words to him, and I'd never get the chance to. Light flooded the room as a door on the side was thrown open, and another Martian stepped in. It saw me and gurgled something to the others. They all stopped and followed after him, leaving me alone on the floor. Relieved to be by myself, I closed my eyes and let myself rest. Max. I woke up with my hands tied behind me in a Martian carrier on my way back to their planet. They hadn't killed me on the field. That meant they planned to make a big show of it. This was a good thing. It bought me some time. Not that I had much of a chance of escaping now. I couldn't believe I was going to die before hitting adulthood. I can't believe I wasn't going to get to see Tyler ever again. I stayed silent while we flew to Mars. I kept my mouth shut as we docked, and I was dragged on my knees down various corridors. I didn't speak when I was thrown into a cell to wait. And when the king of the Martians appeared between the burning hot laser bars of the stinking, rotting flesh cell, I just glared at him with the hatred I had for his stupid, murderous race. Well, well, the king said in perfect English. I hated hearing the English words coming from his jaw, like it decreased the value of the language somehow. The great Kyasora Max Tejuk, finally captured. A smirk spread across his face. That depends on how you look at it, I said in Juperian, because I knew he understood me. just like he knew I could understand Martian. I stood before the king with my hands tied behind my back. I wasn't in disguise. I stood here in my Jupiterian form, proud to be from Jupiter, proud of my heritage. The king frowned at me, if it was possible for a Martian to do so. I'd like to see you try and escape. The king laughed off, trying to reassure himself. I grinned and watched him squirm as he looked over my face. "Stop it!" he barked and then waved for a guard. I laughed and shook my head in dismay. Poor stupid thing. The guard came and handed him something. A Martian camera. It was the king's turn to laugh. He turned the camera screen towards me and hit play. I stepped forward, but not too close, and watched. Tyler was chained to a chair in a dark room. I could hear other Martians with him.
Say hi.
One of the Martians spoke to Tyler in English, who didn't respond.
Say hello,
grumbled another, hitting him. My heart flickered as Tyler's head swung from the force. My hands behind my back clenched into fists, and the king chuckled.
Aren't you going to say hi to your Maxie?
They laughed. Tyler's eyes flicked up to the screen, staring right into mine with a hatred that could rival mine. "Don't you dare hurt him!" he snarled, and something inside me broke.
It's not him you have to worry about.
One of the Martians walked into the light and turned to the camera.
Well, Maxie, why don't you watch as we kill your boyfriend, huh?
One of the monsters said in Martian. I gulped as he walked up to Tyler and held the plasma gun to him.
Look at the camera so Kyasora can see the fear in your eyes,
I heard it say to Tyler. But he didn't. He just looked up at the Martian. There was silence, and then Tyler opened his mouth to speak. "I remember," he said. I froze. Everything in me seemed to pause, as if a button had been pressed in my brain. He what? "I remember everything. I remember you," Tyler said strongly, eyes looking right into mine through the screen. I looked away as they began to beat him. I couldn't handle it. After too many transitions into human form, too much had passed into my bloodstream. I had human emotions, weakened in this form, but there. And right now, rage welled so deep inside nothing could stop it. The king, who hadn't noticed my change in disposition, was still chuckling as he put the camera away. "You see, we have all the power, all the control. There's nothing you can do now but die," the king said, triumphant. I turned my back to him, stalking to the back of the cell. I licked my lips to stop them from drying, as my eyes glowed so bright I could see the rays against the dark cell wall. "You've just made a terrible mistake," I said to the king in Martian. Death will be upon you," the king bellowed, shaking the walls of the room and the cell. "Take him to the arena. Bring both of them." And then the king swept away. I heard the cell door open, and I let them carry me off, my rage still bottled inside, waiting for the right moment to strike. Too far. They've crossed the line for the final time. My vengeance for Tyler's first near death was enough to seal their fate. But now I was going to bring this planet down out of the sky and burn it until there was nothing floating between Jupiter and Earth but a pile of ash. Tyler. I opened my eyes to see the ground moving underneath me. That's strange. It was running past me like a river, floating by, like I was flying over it. Only I wasn't. I was being carried by two Martians. One had my arms, the other had my legs. Both sets of limbs were tied together by chains with heavy locks like before. Everything hurt. All over I ached so much tears fell from my eyes and dropped to the passing floor underneath. There was definitely a few things broken, and ruptured organs bleeding inside me. This was the first time I'd woken up not fixed, and I'd wondered what the reason could have been for this. I didn't have any chance to think about an answer for myself, because we suddenly turned to the right through some doors into a huge arena. It was the size of an AFL field, with rows and rows of cheering Martians crowded around it. Opposite the end I was entering from was a huge box up high, and sitting in the center was a large Martian, bigger than any I'd seen. He wore a golden crown on his head, so I assumed he was the king of Martians. The crowd whooped when they saw me, and I was carried over to two large metal poles sticking out of the center. They were about 20 meters apart from each other, and I was tied to the one on the left, facing the other. "What's going on?" I asked the Martian, tying my arms behind me. The other worked on my legs. But the Martian just laughed in a reply. I frowned. I thought I was going to be beaten to death in that small room. What was going on? Then, from the same door I'd come out of, two Martians dragged Max out by the arms. He was calm, not fighting them off or anything, as he walked between them into the crowd. The crowd, which I'd thought had screamed loud when I entered, went deafening with boos and screams as Max was led into the arena. His head was down, but not in shame, in concentration. "Max!" I called over the crowd. Max froze, his face shifting, and his eyes lifted to mine. They went wide, but he quickly diminished it. "Tyler," he mouthed. I nodded. I looked over him in his Jupiterian form. I'm sure there are more people than not who'd think Max in his alien stature was gross or something, but I still thought he was handsome. It didn't seem to bother me at all. The King Martian stood and held his arms up. He cried something out in that weird language again, and the crowd whooped once more. I looked back to Max and frowned. "What was going on?" I mouthed, but he didn't reply. "Max." "Max?" A voice called me. My heart stopped. No. Please, no. He can't be here. They can't do this. This is low, even for them. I lifted my eyes and looked right into Tyler's. He was chained to a post like me. He looked scared, shaking all over. But worst of all, he was beaten and bruised. The entire right side of his face was red, and down that side of his neck was going purple. His arms had huge blotches of black and blue, and drops of blood were dripping down from the split and swollen lip. My heart shattered seeing him like that, and the pieces floated down to help the fire in my stomach burn brighter. "Tyler?" I mouthed, hoping maybe this was a trick, an illusion, and he was still in that cell I'd seen on the screen. He nodded, but I couldn't take his word for it. A fake would have done the same. The king rose to address his people. "Now, my people, the time has come to destroy the leech that threatened our way of life, to set an example to the Jupiterians who try and stop us from taking over the universe. Death will become of them," he said in Martian, and I knew Tyler wouldn't understand. I was glad for that. He seemed terrified enough already. "What's going on?" he mouthed to me, but I didn't reply because the king was continuing, looking at me now. "Kaya Sora Max Tajuk. Your sentence for your crimes on our people is this. You will watch as your precious earthling dies slow and painfully. And once he is dead, and you have suffered, you will in turn then die slow and painfully beside his dead body." I began to shake all over, and the crowd who'd been cheering began to mumble as they watched me. The shaking became so strong and powerful as the rage took over inside me, that to an onlooker, I began to blur. "Max?" I heard Tyler call to me, but it was too late now. My body was taking over, my instincts kicking in. It was now. It was time. My bones began to crack and break. My skin peeled away from my flesh, replacing the green with a dark navy blue. My eyes burst, exploding with light as they stretched. My ears extended and my chains rattled so loud against the metal post from the vibrations. My limbs thrust outward, and two extra arms grew from my ribs, which cracked apart to make room. The pain was excruciating, but necessary for what was going on. My legs split at the knees, breaking apart into 2 shins and 2 feet on each leg. My toes spread out into talons, and so did my fingers. My cheekbones cracked and struck out, hollowing my cheeks to make room for an extra row of fangs on the top and bottom. The chains had been locked too tight, and now that I had transformed and grown, they strained until they snapped and clattered to the ground. With my 5 glowing eyes, I turned my head to the Martian king slowly and licked my sharp, pointy teeth. My growth into adulthood was now complete. I grabbed the post and ripped it out of the ground, exposing an extra meter length. I held it up like the Earth sport javelin and threw it at the king. It soared through the arena sky and hit its target, catching the king right through his left eye and pinning him to the wall. He shook, then melted around the pole to the ground. I turned to Tyler. He'd slid to the floor down the pole and was staring at me, jaw dropped. I was sure now that it was really him. "I said I would protect you," I told him, and he smiled. He wasn't afraid anymore. Tyler. The new Max stood before me, looking bigger, mightier, and more powerful. He came over to me and pulled me to my feet. Then, in a swipe of his claws on the chains, he sliced through them like butter, and they fell around me. I love you, he told me right then and there. He looked over me, and it was weird being stared at by 5 glowing eyes, but I didn't seem to mind. I love you too, he said. I would have reached up and kissed him if he wasn't now 8 feet tall and towering over me. We should go, I said, glancing past him. Max looked too. Bursting through every exit to the arena were hundreds of Martians charging our way with weapons raised high and glowing ready to fire. Come on, Max said, holding my hand with his bottom right one. He charged, dragging me behind him towards one of the exits. When we reached the horde of Martians, Max swung both left arms at them and sent the whole lot of them tumbling backwards into each other in a black wave. Then he lifted me up and carried me past them as he ran from the arena into the corridor. Once out, he put me down, still holding my hand, and we ran. I didn't know where we were going, but Max seemed to know his way around, and I wondered how many times he'd actually been here. Weaving through the halls like a maze, we opened out into a huge hangar with lots of Martian spaceships. There was one still on by a door, and we ran into it. We climbed inside, and Max took the captain's seat, while I stood in the back, holding on to a pole to the side. Do you know how to fly this? I asked, looking back out the windscreen to the door we'd come through. There was shadows creeping around the corner. They were right behind us. Was all Max replied, and I laughed. I wasn't sure why. We weren't in the clear yet. Maybe it was because I was so happy to see him, and that we were both still alive so far. Max pressed a whole heap of buttons and stuff, and then rose and came to me. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me to the chair, then strapped me in tightly. What are you doing? I asked, trying to take his hands off the seatbelt, but he used his 2 free hands to hold mine while he finished. I've set it on autopilot. It'll take you straight to my house on Jupiter. It's the safest there. I'll meet you when I'm done, he said to me in a serious rush. You're not coming? I asked, frowning. I grabbed his arm to stop him going, even though I knew he was way stronger than me and could rip free. He didn't, though. No, he sighed, bending down over the chair to bring his face close to mine. It was hard for him to do so in the small space we had in the cockpit. There's something I have to do first. Go? Be safe. I'll meet you there soon, he explained. Then, with his top left arm, he reached up and pressed something in his ear. His body shook and he shrunk, changing color, and turned back to Max, the human, the one I knew best. Promise me, he said, holding my face with both hands. I promise, I said, though I didn't want to. If I let him go, would he make it back? Could I really handle losing him if I knew he was actually dead or dying alone somewhere? Max leaned forward and kissed me. I remember everything, I told him. I know, he breathed, eyes still closed from the kiss. He pressed his lips back to mine again, making the second kiss deeper. And then I heard shots outside and the ship lurched sideways once, before righting itself. Max turned and pressed a big red button, and the ship began to move towards a hangar door as it opened. Later, he said, and rushed out the door. I watched him disappear and sighed. I'll wait for him. I will always wait for him. Forever and ever. Even if it's alone on his home planet. Jupiter, huh? I've always been fond of the gassy giant. The flight wasn't long, but it was quiet and lonely, and it seemed longer as I worried. Finally, the ship shifted into Jupiter's atmosphere and floated across a huge city that from this high up looked a little like a creeper vine weeping over the planet. It was moving, full of life, and no one seemed to notice as the ship flew towards the north and landed behind a huge building. The building was odd. It was like a pod growing out of the ground. Huge, at least 3 stories high and pointing right up. There were a few windows across the back of it, and a door at the back bottom like a hatch. It reminded me of Max's ship back in the outback on Earth. I stayed in the seat on the ship and just looked up at the green sky. The gassy air didn't seem breathable to me, but in this ship I could, and so I stayed here, just in case. I'd learned that Jupiter's air was unbreathable, unoxygenated, though I'd also been told there was no life here, and all I had to do was look out the window to prove that wrong. There was a knock on the spaceship door, and I jumped. I looked out the window, but I couldn't see that far around. I was freaking out. Oh God, I've been found. I thought they must have had some security or something to detect rogue ships like this one. Now they've come to cart me away. I can only hope that some of them are as kind and good as Max is. But kind and good weren't the words to describe Max right now. Max. I leapt out of the ship just as it began to take off. I landed with a heavy thud and pressed the stud in my ear again, shifting back into my new blue form just as the Martians spotted me. They turned their weapons from the ship to me, all of them lined up by the hangar door, and took fire. I dodged it, zigging and zagging over to them as I averted the bullets. In my adult form, I was not only stronger, taller, and my senses had amplified, but I was faster too. I was in front of the 20-something Martians before they had a chance to blink, and I looked down at them, now a head taller than they were. I stretched my arms out and piled them all together, then picked them up and threw them out the open hangar door. They passed through the air bubble, holding out the vacuum, and were sucked away into space. That's what happens when there's not a lot of gravity on a planet, and then you build a skyscraper. The rage and hatred that coursed through my veins took over again. Now that Tyler was flying to safety, I zipped through the halls, knocking aside the Martians as I passed, as if they were flies, and made my way to the control chamber. Inside was a huge cylinder the size of the Statue of Liberty. It towered up through the entire tower, from the base to the top story, and inside the thick glass casing was flowing, glowing green liquid. The sight of it made me sick to my core, and I had to avert my eyes to stop myself from being sick. Jupurian blood. That's what was inside the chamber. They electrified it in there to use as an energy source. Inside that cylinder were the soldiers I had fought with in battle, Jupurians I'd gone through training with. My uncle, cousin, and nephew were in there. No doubt there would be children, too, from the many attacks on small villages across the planet before the forces could get there. Judging from the size, there were at least a couple thousand of my people in there at the moment. I gulped to subdue the sickness and creeping up my throat and went to a control board, ripping off the casing to reveal the many wires. I worked fast, hacking the database in my computer for help, as I changed up the wires and cables. Then I pressed the button at the top to activate the bomb. If my calculations were accurate, I had about 5 minutes to get the hell out of here if I wanted to live. I whirled around, but froze. Standing in the doorway was a huge Martian, as big as the king had been, if not bigger. She snarled, baring her teeth. I could tell it was a girl because of the purple scales around the back of her neck.
"You killed my husband,"
she snarled in Martian, lunging at me with a weapon. Good, I said, and dodged her blow. She snarled and hissed, snapping her jaws at me as we danced around the chamber. I turned for the door, but the queen caught my wrist and threw me against the cylinder wall. I felt the glass crack underneath my spine and froze. If I moved, the entire thing would blow, sending a wave of blood and glass on top of both of us. The queen, who was still holding my wrist, realized this, and her eyes went wide.
"Filth,"
she hissed at me.
"I will gladly die to rid the universe of you."
Then she pulled me down, and I fell on top of her. She grabbed at me so I couldn't run to the door, and I looked over my shoulder as the glass gave, and the green blood of my people burst through the cracks, forming up the side. Tyler. I stood inside the hatch door, staring at it. The person knocked again, and I gave in, opening it. Something leapt in and shoved something onto my face. I struggled to get free, but I was pinned against the wall. They stuck it around the back of my head, and I kicked but caught nothing. Then I was let go, and I fell to the ground. I looked up to see a Jupurian like how Max had been after he changed. But this one was more pastel navy blue than Max. He looked older, too, wearier, but still strong. Sorry, the Jupurian said in English. I blinked, feeling around my face. I was wearing some sort of mask over my mouth and nose, and it had a cable that stretched down to a bottle now laying on my lap. But you can't breathe our air. He held out his bottom left hand, and I took it as he helped me to my feet. I'm Caius, Max's dad. Caius Sora Riveth, the man said, shaking my hand. Tyler Montgomery, I replied awkwardly, looking around. I tucked the bottle of oxygen under my arm and looked out the open door into the backyard. Come on, we should get you a disguise, Riveth said, leading me out the hatch and down the steps to the back door of the house. The Jupurian air was quite warm, but not dry like Australian heat. It was moist and clingy, like I'd imagine a rainforest to be. How did you know I was coming? I asked as the door opened in the strange house and I was led inside. Inside the house was like magic. It was round like the building and one huge big room that stretched out wide. Opposite me were two what I could only call couches, shaped like bananas. They were red and floating off the ground. To the right were some weird kind of electrical stuff. There was something that resembled a stove and oven, and another thing that sort of looked like a fridge, but I wasn't sure. On the right side were floating glowing flat seats with no legs around a huge rectangular pipe with things hanging from it. Max Tajuk sent me a quick message before you left, saying you were coming alone. He shielded the ship well, and when I saw you land, I knew, Riveth explained, leading me over to a platform slightly raised from the ground by the front door, which I hadn't noticed before. He stood on it, and I stood beside him, as it jiggled and then began to rise. The roof above us opened up, and we rose into the second level. This room was so different from the first. It was like an indoor forest, with trees and plants and vines everywhere. Amongst all the plants were more chairs, tables, and other electrical things. I'd never imagined nature and computers to work as one like this before. They'd always seemed to rival each other back on Earth. But here there was a computer screen inside a tree. Riveth led me through the trees towards a window at the back. There was a desk here, and he opened one of the drawers, grabbing out an ear stud like the one Max wore. Put this on, Max's father told me, holding it out. I took it and clipped it into my earlobe, feeling it buzz through my ear and across the front of my head. Press it, Riveth instructed, and I did. I pressed it once, and my body shook, shifting out. The mask dropped from my face, and I blinked, taking in a breath through my gills. Gills? That's new. What a weird feeling. There's a mirror through here, Riveth laughed at my expression, and I ran to it, going through the trees to a door. I went into the room to find a bathroom, or the Juperian equivalent, and rushed to the mirror. I looked at my reflection with 5 glowing eyes. I looked like Max did now, but different. I still looked like me in a way. How come I'm not green? I asked Max's father, who'd just appeared in the doorway smirking. Max is a late bloomer. Most of us go through puberty at 40. Looks like you did too. Or you would have been like him. Mr. Kayasora explained. I nodded. So that's what happened? Max went through puberty? I laughed, feeling up the black spots on my cheeks. They tingled at my touch, and I shuddered. Hit puberty, did he? About time. Riveth laughed. Well, now you can fit in just fine, I think. I'll have to teach you the basic Juperian speech so you can get by, because who knows how long you'll be staying. When my son gets his mind set on something... Riveth trailed off, going back into the other room. I looked myself over again. 4 arms, 2 legs, 4 shins, 4 feet. It was hard to get used to. The idea, I mean. The whole thing was actually quite easy to do. I was amazed I could even walk into this room, but it seemed almost natural. 5 different visions. It was all easy enough. The one thing I couldn't get used to, though, was the feeling inside the front of my jeans, which had stretched now that I'd grown. Riveth showed me around the house. He told me about everything and what it all did. While he did so, he taught me words in the Juperian language. We ate strange fruit called uyo that tasted sweet and salty at the same time. He told me stories about his people and the other nations around the planet. A few hours later, Max's mom came home. She was beautiful, with rich scarlet skin and glowing purple eyes. She was happy to meet me. She hugged me so hard I heard something pop. And when she saw I was still in my now stretched human clothes, she insisted on finding something of Max's for me to wear. I changed and sat with his parents, telling them about my world while they spoke of theirs. By the time night fell, I'd almost forgotten about my worry for Max, though I never forgot I was waiting for him. T. Iknak Guhi, Miss Kayasora said to her husband, her Kulki in Juperian. Bap, her husband replied. Ah, Shian said. Riveth and Shian Kayasora. They were very welcoming people. Max was lucky to have them as parents, and I was lucky to be here. But I wanted Max to come back now. He'll be back soon, sweetie, Shian said to me, patting my left knee with one of her hands. She must have noticed me staring out the window for the millionth time. Set Tijo, I replied, I know. Max. I was thrown out the door into the corridor by the flood. A huge piece of glass pinned me up into the hallway wall while the blood flood rushed past. The glass shard was squishing me here like a bug, but I managed to get 2 arms under it and pushed it out from my chest so I could breathe. I watched the queen gush by screaming and didn't feel bad at all not trying to save her. The flood eased as the blood swept away, and I fell to the floor, landing on the glass. The ground was covered in sticky, glowing green blood, and I held my breath so I wouldn't breathe it in. The smell would ruin me. By now, I only had 2 minutes to escape. I dashed through the building, making my way to one of the hangars, and jumped into a craft. I sat in the captain's seat and started it up, lifting it from the bay floor. Something smashed into the side, and the whole ship was blown sideways into another, scraping along into a corner. I was ripped out of my seat and shoved into the wall, the queen's hand under my chin against my neck. Her fingers were curled over my gills, and I couldn't breathe. I clawed at her hands, ripping open the black flesh, but still she didn't let go. So I lifted my legs up, pressing all 4 against her chest, and shoved them out as I pressed my back into the wall. That worked, and she fell back across the cockpit, smashing through the windscreen to the hangar floor. I grabbed a weapon out of the rack on the side and dived out the broken window, landing on the hood. The queen was struggling to her feet, pulling glass pieces of the windshield out of her flesh, so I dived off the bonnet and plunged the weapon through the top of her skull. It came out under her chin, and she stared at me in surprise before I yanked it out and did it again, this time in the side of the neck. "Die already!" I hissed at her, and then she melted off the end to the ground. It was too late now, though. Before I could say, "Goodbye, Tyler," the building shook, and a fireball ripped through the walls as it exploded from my bomb.